The federal government has tabled new legislation aimed at reducing interprovincial trade barriers, easing labor mobility, and advancing major projects. Tabled Friday, it's less than 20 pages long, but includes key elements of the government's push to solidify the economy. The government will now look to advance the legislation in Parliament before the summer break. And the Assembly of First Nations is holding an emergency meeting next week focused on the implications of that legislation. Joining us now is AFN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak. Chief, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So what are your biggest concerns surrounding this legislation?
Well, for sure, because we've just received a copy of the bill, our legal team will review the draft and we will provide a full response over the coming days. We will also organize a meeting with chiefs across the country, a national online forum, to review the bill together and get the chiefs' feedback and make sure that we have proper legal analysis and political analysis done. We do appreciate that Prime Minister reached out Thursday to explain his government's plan to define and fast-track strategic national infrastructure projects through legislation. And we had said to the Prime Minister that First Nations support efforts to protect Canada from economic uncertainty and advance resource revenue sharing agreements. However, First Nations are also very concerned that this proposal may violate collective rights. They have only increased given the approaches that have happened in this country, in Ontario, in British Columbia, and of course the Alberta Premier, her public statements about separating from Canada. So that is why it's so important that Parliament and the Senate take the time needed to ensure First Nations and rights holders have an opportunity to properly review, speak, and propose improvements to this legislation before it is passed. And we fear attempts to ram legislation through Parliament may have significant consequences. And I think Canadians also want to, have the time to look at things properly and do things in a good way. The rights of First Nations under international law, the United Nations Declaration Act, and the Constitution of Canada are at stake, and failure to obtain free, prior, and informed consent will likely result in protracted litigation. During my discussion with the Prime Minister on Thursday, we were also pleased to restate the significant nation-building opportunities associated with finally closing Canada's long-standing and shameful First Nations infrastructure gap. This gap has perpetuated deep-rooted inequality in Canada and has led to poor health outcomes, limited education opportunities, and less prosperity for First Nations compared to that of other Canadians. So we will continue inviting the Prime Minister to take the opportunity to use this legislation to finally fast-track modern schools, clean water, quality housing, internet access, all-season roads, and vital community infrastructure for First Nations, and especially for First Nations kids. So closing the First Nations infrastructure gap will strengthen Canada's autonomy, resilience, and security, and it will provide significant economic and social benefits to our country. It will advance the interests of First Nations, and it will greatly contribute to clean growth and meeting Canada's climate change goals. So as just to close off, as we enter the 10th anniversary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, we can't think of a better nation-building project than making sure that First Nations kids on reserve, if we're going to fast-track anything, fast-track housing, schools, access to clean water, high-speed internet. Many of our kids off reserve have those things. Many of our kids on reserve, most of our kids on reserve don't. So let's talk about that.
All right. And you've spoken to Prime Minister Mark Carney about this, as you've indicated. How do you feel about his openness towards this? What was the impression that you got?
Well, we did start our relationship off a couple of weeks ago. I want to thank him we've been talking almost on the daily. Wildfires, there's lots of things that First Nations are experiencing at the moment. So I thank him for being open and working with me on an almost daily basis. And I know that our elders had started off our relationship with prayer and to ask God, our Creator, to try and help our relationship as we try and make and build a better country together. And that means respecting each other and respecting, the inherent rights of First Nations. Thank you.
That is our time, Chief. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for being here. That's Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations.
Thank you.